It seems that from the very beginning of our attempts to worship God, there have been debates about religious laws, customs, and rituals between believers. And I would say even now, right? There is usually plenty of debate to go around about which rituals and which traditions should be practiced or not. Where should the tabernacle go? What's the most appropriate posture for the reception of Holy Communion? How much should the congregation sing? Or one of my favorites, what kind of clothing should people wear to church? And many of us have pretty strong opinions on these matters. And some people think they don't matter at all. A rather oversimplified interpretation of the gospel today would see Jesus' comments as indicating that he would fall on one side of this debate. One of those who does not really care about tradition or ritual. As he says very clearly, the externals are not the things that defile, but it's what comes from within our hearts. And I'm sure you've kind of heard that line of thought that, that God doesn't really care. He doesn't care what I wear to church. He doesn't care how we do all of these things. And that we shouldn't be so preoccupied with traditions and rituals. But it does beg a question a bit. If it was true that the way to interpret Jesus saying is that externals do not matter, and that what matters is in the heart when it comes to religion and to God, then what should we do? Should we just kind of each do our own interior thing and just try to be a good person? How are we supposed to do things together or decide if we wanted to do things in common, what to do? And how do we hand on our faith to our children? Is it just whatever I kind of like? And we might look at the world around us as well and say, but isn't ritual and tradition part of just what it means to be a human being? I remember one time I was asked to give a presentation about Catholicism for a class on world religions they were doing in a university nearby. So I was speaking about the various traditions and rituals that make up our faith. And I remember that one of the other Christian leaders from a non-traditional church, after we were talking about tradition and whatnot, she said, we like to think that we don't have rituals in my church, but we really do. Like, if you were to change the way that you set up the coffee pot for fellowship after the service, God forbid if you did that ritual the wrong way. And it's true, we as a people, we can't escape ritual. We can't escape tradition. Ritual and tradition are part of what it is to be a human person. And I think that if you really consider, if we look at what Jesus is saying, if we look at his whole life and teaching, that we see that when it comes to ritual and tradition, his approach is not simplistic. Studying the scriptures, we see that Jesus clearly believed in the importance of Jewish tradition and custom and laws. He said so many times. He practiced Jewish rituals and traditions faithfully. He instructed his followers to do so. And ritual and tradition was clearly a part of the life of the Christians from the very beginning of the church. And that makes sense. because rituals and traditions can beautifully express faith in a way that unites not only those who gather in a given moment, but also unites us with those from the past and the future. I mean, think for a moment, during this Mass, it is really ritual that unites us to Christ himself, as the priest takes the bread and wine and repeats the words and actions that Jesus carried out with his disciples 2,000 years ago. What I think we actually see in Jesus' critique of the Pharisees today is not a criticism of ritual or tradition, but actually a defense of it. It is precisely because Jesus loves tradition and ritual that he teaches his disciples about the greatest threat to it. And the greatest threat to ritual and tradition is sin and division in the hearts of those who live it. No matter how beautiful the liturgy, no matter how stunning the church, no matter how profound the spiritual and intellectual riches, no matter how fascinating the thousands of saints and feasts and festivals and miracles that surround our Catholic tradition and ritual, he wants us all to know and understand that it will all crumble to the dust if not sustained by genuine charity rising from the hearts of believers. St. Paul makes this clear. Be doers of the word and not hearers only, deluding yourselves. What's the delusion? That our religious traditions and rituals, our Catholic identity, could somehow perpetuate itself without our hearts being converted to Christ, without us following his path of holiness and virtue. And I think we all know this at a pretty deep level, don't we? The greatest threat to our Catholic family is not the misguided working of ritual and liturgy, but it's our sinfulness. This building would be just a museum, a mausoleum, if it were not for the love that dwells within our hearts and must fill this space and must reach out beyond these walls and into our homes and into our communities. Do we not see and know that these rituals and this tradition that we have received and that we celebrate this afternoon, it comes to us from hearts that are on fire with a love for Christ and can only be transmitted to the next generation by similar hearts aflame. So it's not either or. Tradition and ritual over here, love of neighbor over there. It's both and. Both deep love for our rich tradition and ritual and a deep love for Christ that is alive in our hearts and expressed in a holy life. This dynamic, rich combination is what allows us to express and to share our faith and to live it each day. Hearts afire with a love for God and his church, and our tradition, and our ritual, and for our neighbor.